Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through the Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today for a discussion of the politicization of the judicial system is Rabbi David Seidemann. And now, Mr. Davis and Rabbi Seidemann.
Welcome back. I hope you welcome me back. We took a break because the last two Wednesdays were holy holidays for the Jewish people. I happen to be Jewish, if you didn't notice, and I couldn't do the programs the last two Wednesdays. So I really missed you guys. It's great to be back with you, and we have a very interesting subject today that we're going to address. It's about judges. I'm sure all of you recognize that we have three different three different branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The executive is the president and all the people that he appoints, all the people that are elected, the vice president, and so forth. The legislative is all of Congress, all the members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And the third branch are the judges that are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate, in most cases. In some districts and some milieu, they do have elected judges, people vote directly for judges. But anyway, our forefathers and their tremendous wisdom decided that these three are necessary to balance each other. So no one branch, the executive can't be a dictatorship. The legislature can't determine laws without the president's approval because he can veto it. And the judicial is supposed to rule if anything is consistent with the Constitution itself. So it's over the centuries now. What is it? 2 centuries. Over the last since the founding of the country and the establishment of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it's worked pretty well, except in recent years, in the most recent years, it seems like each branch is instead of being a limitation on the other branches, is becoming like, feels like they have the final determination. They're the dominant branch that determines what our laws should be, in fact. And the best example of that is what happened with the birth control pill. I can't even pronounce it. It's not minestrone. That's
Mifeprestone, I believe it's. Mifeprestone.
It's mistake. Anyway, where a judge in Texas ruled that this drug that's been in use for more than 20 years now was approved by the FDA as being safe and effective. He decided that they didn't do the job right, and therefore the drug should be approved and reworked again, researched again as to whether it's a legitimate drug that people should take. And this is a case where the judge is making law, because the law is that the FDA is the final determinator of whether a drug is safe and whether it's effective. And that's not the role of the judiciary, because it's not dealt with in the Constitution, and the agency that's been selected by the executive branch and the legislative branch and voted by a majority of the legislature established the FDA. So much so that even the drug companies that usually resent agencies, regulations, are so upset by this ruling because any judge now could come along and say the same thing about whatever drug they don't like or what they choose to reject. It should be like there's a story about a couple that has a conflict, a married couple, and they come to the rabbi to help them out. So the husband tells his story, and the rabbi says, "You're right." And then the wife tells her story, and he says to her, "You're right." So his shamus, his assistant, says, "Rabbi, you made a mistake. You told the husband he's right, and you told the wife she's right. So that can't be." So he says to the shamus, "You're right too. That we should have more of that in this country. We have the opposite. The minute that something is raised, there's a total conflict, and nobody agrees with anything that the other party says." So without dominating this program, we have a real voice of wisdom, Rabbi David Seidemann, who's not only appropriate for this subject because he's a rabbi, and rabbis in the Jewish religion make the determination of what the Jewish constitution is, which is the Torah, the Old Testament. And he's also a lawyer who's very knowledgeable and insightful on the Constitution and the laws of this country. So it's a pleasure to welcome him back again, and get the benefit of his wisdom and his encyclopedic knowledge. So Rabbi, lawyer, LLB, whatever you...
Friend. That's why I like to be introduced as your friend.
That's the
best accolade.
That's the best part of you.
So I don't know, just to give a little bit of background, how this case is actually being heard. Today is Wednesday when we're recording this. The Supreme Court is actually supposed to deal with this case today. And just for those people that are not familiar with how a case like this gets to the Supreme Court, we have a federal system of courts in America. Every state has their own courts, and there's local courts. Then there's federal district courts, which deal with cases between two states or federal questions such as this. And there's, I think, 91 of them across the country. I think that's the number. And then above that, there's 13 circuit courts of appeal. And above that, there's the circuit court, not circus.
Circus court.
Yeah, sometimes it is.
It seems like circus courts. Right.
Circuit court of justice. And there's one United States Supreme Court. So what was interesting is that a case was brought in Texas against, decided by a judge who, according to most reports, is an anti-abortionist, and there's been allegations that there was forum shopping in getting this case in front of the judge. But the judge in Texas ruled that this drug that the FDA approved, that the FDA didn't do their job 20 years ago. They didn't really do their homework on the negative effects of this drug. Now, this drug is actually used in concert with a second drug, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. What does it mean if they outlaw this drug? Is the second drug still going to be available? At any rate, on the very day that this judge in Texas decided that the FDA didn't do their homework and this drug is coming off the shelf, another judge in Washington State, I believe it was the very same day, another federal district court decided, no, FDA did their homework, the drug stays on the market. Well, whenever you have a conflict between two federal district courts, that's a recipe for a case going up to the United States Supreme Court. But it has to go someplace else first, and the Texas case, at least, went to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the Texas ruling and said the drug coming off. But actually, the Circuit Court of Appeals said that the drug doesn't have to come off, but we're going to add more restrictions. When it can be used, how it can be used, etc. So it sort of modified the Texas ruling. Well, there was an emergency application to the Supreme Court. Now, each Supreme Court justice is assigned on an emergency basis to handle certain cases from different circuit courts of appeals. So in this case, the Fifth Circuit, which is based in New Orleans, that's Judge Alito's jurisdiction. And Judge Alito, who we all know is an arch-conservative, known as one of the most conservative judges on the bench, Supreme Court bench, blocked the Texas ruling temporarily and blocked the Circuit Court of Appeals ruling. Now, what's interesting is the Supreme Court is supposed to take this up today, but if they don't, if for some reason they don't get to it today, the restrictions, the block on the Texas thing runs out tonight, meaning that the Texas order will stand and the drug will be banned. But this touches on, and you alluded to it, this touches on a fundamental question. And that is, who empowered these agencies to exist? When they were empowered to exist, were they given total discretion, which will always escape judicial review, which is what you asserted in your opening comments? And even if that is true, if in giving that unfettered discretion, if 20 years later we do discover something, should the Supreme Court be able to step in? Now, again, in your opening remarks, you said something which is so true, and that is that so many, if not most of all decisions these days are political and not based on the merits. Having said that, you also mentioned that the founders, in their wisdom, still believed that a tripart system of government is the best, where they all act as check and balances, and I agree with you that the check and balance is out the window. But this is exactly what's going on in Israel.
Mostly checks.
Yeah. They write checks. The
check.
biggest check, right. There's no balancing, just checks. But this is what's going on in Israel now, where Bibi and Netanyahu is trying to shift the power between the executive branch and the judicial, and we see all the unrest there. So those are my initial comments. I want to hear more from you. Obviously, it's your show. But I think that there's two issues that we can focus on. One is, when an agency is created, does that give them unfettered discretion for the rest of time? And two, is this all just a ruse? Is this a completely politically driven agenda by a judge? And if so, how do you ever combat that? If the judicial branch is the final arbiter, the supremacy clause, right? Only the United States Supreme Court can say whether something is constitutional or not. The United States Supreme Court can say an executive order is unconstitutional, can say an act of Congress, a bill, is constitutional. It's very difficult for the executive branch or the legislative branch to override a Supreme Court decision. The question, Morty, is, now that we know, we've lived it the last few years, how politicized even the judicial branch has become, what's the check and balance system on that? How do you stop a runaway court?
Right.
How do you stop a runaway court?
And in this case particularly...
And I'm sorry for holding the mic for so long, but...
No, you made very good points. In this instance, the assertion that this judge in Texas made, that the FDA didn't do its job, that they were somehow remiss in approving this drug, is outrageous, because he hasn't done any research. He hasn't given any basis for saying that. It's been out for 20 years. It's been safe. So it's clearly unrelated to the facts of what the FDA did. He's saying the FDA was remiss. How did he arrive at that conclusion?
Right. Well, this
So
goes back
that's-
23 years. The FDA approved it in the year 2000.
Yeah,
so we're
but
talking 23.
there's been no question raised as to the validity of that decision that the FDA made. And he comes along and says it was illegal that what they did. There's not one iota of evidence to that effect. It's just like Trump and some of his people saying he won the election, and they took it to 60 courts, and only one court even took it up because they all said there's not a scintilla of evidence to support that. In this case also, there's not any facts.
Well, the handwriting was on the wall a year ago for a case like this, because a year ago the Supreme Court said that there is no national right in the Constitution for an abortion. That was a year ago. So that was the beginning of, that was the handwriting on the wall. Since then, 12 states that are, we would call Republican-aligned states, have passed outright bans on abortions. So this was happening. This was on the wall, and the fact that they got it in front of this judge, Kaczmarek, I think his name is, if I remember correctly, that they got this in front of this judge in Texas. Well, we all know what kind of state Texas is, So it's red. It's red. So to the extent that it wound up in this court in front of this judge, again raises questions that we've touched on. How do you stop? Look, I'm in the middle of two trials now, two different divorce trials, one in the Bronx and one in Kings County, and the issues are pretty much the same.
If you lose, how much years do you get to serve?
Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting point also. Trump, this judge in Texas was a Trump-appointed a judge. So again, the handwriting was on the wall. But the point I was making is I'm in the middle of two trials at the same time now. Divorce trials, they're not consecutive dates. When a judge has a day here, he'll hear. So yesterday I was on trial in Brooklyn. Tomorrow I'm on trial in the Bronx. And the issues are pretty much the same, but I'm expecting different rulings because I've got two different judges. I'm not going to say which one is which because we're still in the middle of trial.
Don't say anything.
I'm not saying anything. And then
you'll bias.
Right. Who knows if the judges listen to this podcast?
Right.
But for all of us lawyers, we talk about all the time. You got to get the right jury and you got to get the right judge.
In a way, the guy in Texas has some jurisdiction, according to the Supreme Court, because only a short while ago they ruled that if it's not specifically in the Constitution, addressed in the Constitution, it reverts to the states. I think it's called federalism.
Right.
So,
right. So anything not specifically addressed. Right.
So abortion was not addressed in the Constitution.
Correct.
So it reverts to the states. Texas is still a state. To the last time I checked,
it hasn't
anyway.
been overrun yet.
No, it's not overrun. It's trying to withdraw and start its own country. So, because they don't like some of the liberal things that have passed over the years. So, in that case, it would seem to me that they would say it reverts back to the states. But if there's a jurisdictional problem with two judges arguing different, I think somebody has to be the referee.
Right.
So maybe in that case, the Supreme Court does have a role.
Right.
You would know that better than I.
Yeah. When there is a dispute between two district court rulings, federal district court rulings, or two circuit court of appeals rulings, that's the type of case that's going to make its way to the Supreme Court, because there has to be some finality.
There has to be some way to resolve it. Yeah.
Right. So, but I agree with you that, and this actually dovetails into the second topic that we were going to talk about today, is how do you deal with judges or prosecutors that have a political agenda? And even if there is no political agenda, and this is such an important point I want to make, even if a judge does not have a political agenda, or a prosecutor like Alvin Bragg doesn't have a political agenda, you will never convince half of the population that they don't have a political
What do you
agenda.
mean? Jordan says he came to New York and he's got, what's his name, under trial. He's got Bragg under trial, the DA.
Right.
When it's not even his business, it's a local.
Well,
He says it's his jurisdiction because the government is paying some of the costs of Bragg's.
investigation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think what Jordan is saying is, since we can get into this second topic later, but just quickly, since the statute of limitations on the misdemeanor of falsification of business records, which is a 2-year statute of limitations in New York, since that expired, the only way Bragg can bring this case is if he bootstraps it to a federal election campaign finance violation, crime, if you will. But that's a federal. The states don't have jurisdiction. So if the entire state prosecution is predicated on a violation of something that's been entrusted to the federal government, that is what Representative Jordan's and Alan Dershowitz, who's no Trump fan.
He is a Trump fan.
Well, he didn't start out as a Trump fan, and is not known as a Republican or a conservative. He's a Democrat, and he says that all the
He's
time.
a strong
Right.
Trump supporter.
Now he is. Now he is. I mean, he has come out with a number of videos that I've seen in the last few weeks, really castigating Bragg for the prosecution for many reasons. One of them being what I just said, and that is that he's bootstrapped this to a federal issue, which a local DA has no jurisdiction.
Yeah, but remember, Michael Cohen, who was
Right.
Trump's lawyer, went to serve jail time on that specific issue. Not that he made a payment to the
Correct.
mistress or the
Right.
girlfriend or the whatever you call her of Trump's, that he had an affair
Yeah,
with her.
but the statute of limitations was still viable at that time, and in this case, the only reason why Bragg can bring this is because he's doing something which is completely unprecedented. Bragg is famous in this city for taking felonies and reducing them to misdemeanors. That's his MO. And here he's taken a misdemeanor and elevated it to a felony, which is really just not what he does when he gets up every morning. And not only has he linked it to a felony, he's linked it to a felony that Federal Election Commission and others and prior prosecutors have already passed on and said there's no violation. But B, this is not his jurisdiction. And it's going to, my prediction, and Alan Dershowitz's prediction, you don't need mine. I would trust Alan Dershowitz's, you don't need my stamp of kosher on it, but it's going to fall apart. You can't, a local DA does not have jurisdiction over federal election campaign finance.
I think he has jurisdiction because it emanates from the discovery of the violations that were not known up to you can't bring a case if it wasn't known, and all the business manipulation.
Right, but that's the
that what's his
misdemeanor.
name is what's his name is in jail for it. Weissenberg is in jail because of that, and that was only recently discovered. So the statute of limitations only begins from the time that somebody becomes aware that there was somebody broke the law.
Well,
It doesn't-
I disagree with you, respectfully.
Why?
Because that's not true. If I broke the law 10 years ago and the government never found out about it, that's to my benefit. If I've got a gun in my backyard that I used in the commission of a crime, and the government comes looking for it, and I pick it up and I move it, that's a problem. But I'm not required to disclose the fact that the gun is there. I'm not required to make any statements that incriminate myself. And if they find the gun there after the statute of limitations, good, happy days for me, sad days for the government.
Well,
That's the way it works, Morty.
I'm clearly wrong if you're right. because
That's true.
because
I have to be right sometimes.
no, you're always right. Like the rabbi said, you're right. You're right too.
You're right too. Right.
No, it's my impression that if it couldn't have been discovered till it was discovered, then you can bring the lawsuit then.
If I did something to conceal it. But if I didn't do anything to conceal it, and it just didn't come to light because nobody told you, or you didn't have the right investigative tools.
Well, Trump concealed it.
Okay, so now you're getting into the merits
but
of the
there's a guy in
case.
jail that proves that.
No, it proves that the guy in jail had knowledge of something and did something wrong, but it doesn't prove that Trump did.
No,
Because
but
if
it's
it
many
did-
years.
Because
But
if
it's
it did,
many
they would-
years. It's
Okay, I
been
don't-
court for many years. So they could say, well, you're bringing a case now. All the sins that he did occurred years ago. So
Look, we know what's going to happen. It's going to wind its way through the courts in New York. If it's not dismissed, and again, I don't know a lot about this judge that has the case other than the fact that he's ruled on other Trump cases before, which could be a problem. You also have there's going to be a motion to change venue to Richmond County probably. But this is not going to, even if somehow a New York jury convicts him.
the best judge that I've noticed recently was Judge Kaplan, who was the judge in the Fox
Defamation case?
defamation and dominion.
Right, they just
Dominion
settled
case.
for like close to $1 billion, what, 1.7 billion or something like
No,
that?
it's
Less.
It's 800, just short of
800 million.
Just short of 800 million.
Right, close to $1 billion. Right. Yeah.
But he put the case where in a position where it had to be resolved,
Right.
and he didn't allow for delays, and he ruled on major issues related to the case.
The actual malice issue.
Yeah, so he didn't leave it, most judges seem to vacillate and avoid these kind of things. And he brought it to a point where he wouldn't allow Fox to say, well, it's the First Amendment and free speech. He said that he really ruled that was bull.
Well, I think what the issue came down to is Fox was saying we were simply reporting newsworthy, we were reporting what Trump believed as opposed to saying what they believed the truth to be. And the judge didn't go for that. And the judge, am I correct? Yeah, the judge was simply saying, listen, there's internal emails that show that you were doing more than just reporting what Trump believed to be true. You were carrying his water. And they had no choice. They had to settle.
You were saying that
that the machines were rigged.
That, what's his name was won, and you kept fighting it.
And I believe that what they settled for is about 25% of Fox's
Half.
of their revenue, and they took a big hit. And there's other.
That's nothing for them. They were not embarrassed by having all the key guys come and testify, including the
Tucker
owner of the
Carlson would have had to
station.
testify. Sean Hannity would have had to come to testify. Right. So, there's another lawsuit that has not
Yeah.
settled.
Yeah. It's for more money, $2.5 billion.
Yeah.
Smartmatic.
Yeah, and also related to Fox's coverage of this. So yeah, one for the liberals.
You want to know something?
Yeah.
For Fox, it's the equivalent of paying a parking ticket. Some of it, I think, will be a tax deduction.
Right. But it's tough to spin this.
Also,
in
they may have insurance. I don't know if they have insurance.
I don't know, but it's tough to spin this in any positive way because they can't even. If they want to try to defend this and go on, the road saying, we were screwed.
No, they won't.
They can't. They really.
They accomplished the best that they could accomplish.
Yeah.
Fox got a good deal because the real thing is that the nation, most people would have liked to hear those superstars testify.
Oh, that would have been fun to see Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity testify.
Right.
That's correct.
And reject their own words.
Man, it really is amazing because, if you're hooked into Fox News, then you believe that that's the gospel. And if you're hooked into CNN or MSNBC, you believe that's the gospel. And it's really a 50-50. I mean, this country is about as divided as you can get. And I don't know where it all ends because the tolerance level for the other side is gone. I mean, there is the debate and speech clause. There's no more debate anymore. There's no speech anymore. There's hollering and protests and violence.
Maybe the answer would be for Supreme Court judges to be elected by the general population. At least there it changes every few years. It's not like Trump appointed 3 judges that are radicals, and 2 of them should have never been appointed in the first place, Thomas and Kavanaugh, because there's enough good qualified people out there that they could have held up those appointments and made sure what the facts were, because in the case of Thomas, his assistant testified that he was abusive in terms of sexually abusive. She didn't make a strong enough case. She only said he made remarks and so forth.
Well, this was Anita Hill?
If she would have brought him down and said he propositioned her, if you're going to bring a case, at least make it a strong case. And so the Republicans got him through, and he's like the biggest thief, and he's the one that's judging. I mean, he says that he didn't know. Here's a guy who's judging all of the laws of the land.
Didn't know what?
He didn't know that he had to report this.
Oh, the property?
The property sale and millions of dollars of gifts and so forth. And
Interesting claim.
And not only that, he sold the property to Crow, a billionaire.
Yeah.
And after he sold it, he gave Thomas's mother free rent forever in those buildings.
I disagree with you that judges should be elected.
Why?
But I'll tell you why in a minute. But I do believe that there should be term limits, and that would solve some of the problem. Once you get into elections, then you're no different than there's even more politics. Then the screaming and the yelling, and the average American can vote for a president because if they're wrong, he's gone in 4 years. They can vote for a congressman because if they're wrong, he's gone in 2 years. They can vote for a senator because he's wrong, he's gone in 6 years. And there's enough other senators and congressmen have voted. But a Supreme Court justice,
I don't know why they did that.
So I think they have to be appointed and confirmed by the Senate. That's the check and the balance. But have a rotation system.
But that becomes very political. All you need to do is look at what happened with Garland.
Right.
What's his name appointed him? Was it Obama that appointed him?
Merrick Garland? Yeah.
Merrick Garland. He had a right to appoint him. And what's his name? Mitch McConnell was head of the Senate at that time.
Right.
Republicans. And he refused to even bring him up for a vote. That's outrageous. And he argued, his whole argument was, that there's only 11 months left on.
Right. You're a lame duck president. Right.
So we should wait till there's an election and a new president, whoever he is.
Well, Trump got lucky in that regard. The Republicans, the conservatives got lucky in that regard.
I understand, but it was ridiculous. It's outrageous because not only that, 3 years later, maybe 3 or 4 years later, Trump appointed a new Supreme Court judge like 2 months before the election, not 11 months before.
Right.
So it shows you the Supreme Court is corrupt in so many ways. When they passed the law, Citizens United, when they said, it used to be you were limited how much you could spend to support different parties and
Right.
different candidates. And they ruled that the corporation is just like a person, and they could give as much as they want. It's free speech. Money, they said, is free speech. And, so it's whatever they choose to say, and then find support for it. They say you're right, but
Well, that's what we said at the beginning, that there is this politicization, and even if there isn't, and to me this is even a bigger problem, because even if you would say that these 9 justices are the sharpest minds out there and they're well versed in the Constitution, and I believe they are smart. There's no dummies on the Supreme Court, but you're never going to convince the other half of the world that they're not. That it's not politics.
No, but
And
how do you let Thomas? You have no rules for the Supreme Court that they have to. What do you call it when they recuse themselves?
right.
That they don't have to recuse themselves. Even Thomas's wife was an activist. An organization she started was funded by Crow, and it was one of the strongest advocates for Trump's view that he won the election and Biden's a phony serving under fraudulent terms, or and there's no evidence of that. And this, with her husband ruling on things like that, he was only one of 9 justices that ruled on one issue related to this. All the others.
I would disagree with you that I don't think the Supreme Court is corrupt. I would think that they're tilted, but that's been the story over the last. I don't think they're corrupt.
I didn't say they're corrupt. I said Thomas is corrupt.
Oh, okay.
And they don't deal with that corruption.
Okay.
And not only that, it's not one-sided, because the Democrats, likewise, all of Congress is corrupt, because they have a rule that Congress can't be brought to trial for insider trading. So there are people sitting in jail
Right.
where it's questionable, but a jury held that they had inside information. And Pelosi apparently did many trades, and they have the best inside information.
She's quite a wealthy woman.
No, and they have the best
Yeah.
inside information, because
Yeah.
if they vote to give Boeing a big contract and it's voted by Congress,
They know that beforehand, right?
they could go out and buy the stock, and then when it's announced, it runs up, she could kick it out and make a guaranteed positive return.
Agree or disagree with all the problems that we've discussed? Do you agree or disagree that this division of power between the three branches of government is the best form of government
I
in the
do,
world?
but
if
I
it works
also
properly.
But I also think systemically, we're no longer living in a democracy. Not as a democracy should be defined, because it's a plutocracy. It's the people who pay the bills for these guys, the donors, who call the shots. That's why you can't get any gun control, even though like 80% of the population, every day there's people getting shot. They pass something, well, we're going to have a red flag. We're going to check out if people are nuts before they'll never track them down.
You'd have to give back all your guns.
It's a distraction. It's outrageous.
Right.
And every day, there's more than one a day mass shootings. Could you believe that?
It's absolutely.
There's been for 140 this year, and there's not 140 days yet.
Right. Listen.
And there's 400 million guns.
Right.
And my son-in-law owns a gun, and he says it's for protection. That's such nonsense.
It's protection from your daughter.
that could be. Yeah. No, but it's protection, and all you're doing is raising. If somebody comes in my house and I find them attacking me or taking my money or I would be the most cooperative, most receptive to anything that he wants, just so I could get him to get out of the house.
Wait a minute. So
But I
you're
wouldn't
telling me
pull
if I
it.
knock on your door one night and ask you for your money, you're going to give it to me?
You
Without
would.
a fight?
No,
Without
you-
a fight?
you would.
You
No, you would.
You I'd shoot.
No, like the black kid that rang the bell at the
Yeah,
wrong place.
yeah,
And the
terrible.
guy shot him through the.
Two of those stories happened One was an African American kid. One was a white
white
girl.
girl,
Yeah, they
yeah.
drove up to their. Yeah, that guy will be sitting for a while.
Which
Yeah.
guy?
The guy that shot both of them, because neither one of them posed any threat. They were outside. The shooter was
No,
inside.
no, but the guy in Missouri who shot the guy at the door,
Yeah.
they have a, what do they call it? Stand your
Ground.
stand your ground.
Yeah, but there has to be some
But
threat.
he felt that there was a threat.
So that's
He'll
going to turn
be
on the
there.
facts. And I don't
The,
think
the
he is.
girl, the white girl, the guy who shot her is a white guy.
And he was inside the house. And,
yeah,
she was outside the house and the door was closed.
Yeah, and he ran after, so
Yeah.
he should probably definitely be.
He will be.
But it's all it's all academic because in the case of Floyd, right? So Floyd, the officers that held him down,
Right, Derek Chauvin, yeah.
they're serving jail time.
Yeah, he just
right?
got his appeal denied last week. Look how smart we are. We're up on everything.
No, but let me tell you something.
Yeah.
There was no question that there was a reasonable doubt because they brought expert witnesses, the other side, the police, that he may have died from overdose or medical conditions. And if there's a reasonable doubt, he's not supposed to be
Convicted.
So that was also political because you couldn't.
There was a certain sentiment there was a certain sentiment and feeling in the country at that time that might have demanded that was the result.
And he turned out Floyd is one of the heroes
Right.
of all time, even though his track record was not an admirable one.
less than stellar.
And to get back to one thing that you
Yeah.
mentioned about Bibi Netanyahu,
Yeah.
what Bibi's trying to do, and he's doing a very poor job of selling it, all he has to do is say this. The United States is the number one democracy in the world. And all I'm doing is duplicating or mirroring what the United States has. In other words, the president selects a member of the Supreme Court, and the Knesset or the
Parliament,
the parliament or the legislature approves it.
Right. Well, he was. Yeah. Right.
So, and in Israel, it's an arbitrary group. There's only 2 members of parliament that serve. All the rest are,
there for 15
they weren't.
minutes.
No, they
right?
weren't. They weren't elected.
Right.
I don't know if you realize years ago, the way it worked. If the president died, the vice president was next in line. You know who was after the vice president?
Speaker of the House.
No,
You.
the secretary. The Secretary of State was
Really?
next.
I thought it was the
The
Speaker of the
Secretary
House.
Treasurer,
Wow.
and they changed that because they said those are not elected officials.
Uh-huh.
So then they changed it to the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader.
Right.
So I'm saying, in this case also, why pick an arbitrary group that has its own political views?
Right. Well,
No,
Bibi's-
but if he sells that as and not only that, but then if the Supreme Court rules, I can't override them.
Right, but Bibi's problem was not just the way he sold it. You're right. That's exactly what he should have
It's
said.
that he's under indictment.
That's the problem. He was the wrong guy to sell it
Yeah.
because the detractors are saying the only reason. By the way, he not immediately, about 3 weeks into this, he said, okay, but this group, if it passes, they won't be presiding over my case. So that was a pivot. But again, he was the wrong guy to sell it.
But I'm saying it should
and
be.
he sold it wrong.
I believe
incorrectly.
that he's right to move in that direction.
He is.
Because
He
they're
sold
not
it
elected,
incorrectly.
just like
Right.
well, we switched from the Secretary of State, which is a big position, Secretary of Treasury, the Secretary of Commerce, I forget what after that. But it was all
Right.
non-elected
Appointees,
officials. The only
appointees.
one that was elected was the Vice President.
Right.
So,
And then the Speaker of the House.
the Speaker of the House is
Right,
right
elect-
after,
so- right.
The guy McCarthy now is right after Kamala Harris.
So there's hope.
Hope for what? There's hope.
There's hope. So I don't know if you saw it today, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. declared his candidacy for the Democratic nomination.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
What, is he a congressman?
He is not.
What is
I
he?
don't think so. We're going to check. But he declared his, and he's
Well, at least there's name
He's-
recognition.
he is to the left. He's got great name recognition. The place where he announced, I think, was in Boston. You couldn't get into the building. And what is he now? He was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s son. He was Robert F. Kennedy's son. Tremendous name recognition, but way to the left. I mean, yeah. Let me see what it is. No, he's a lawyer. Yeah. He's described himself as a truth teller who will end the division. No more division, just multiplication, subtraction, and addition. No more division in math. So that's going to be interesting because, as we know, Biden still has not announced whether he's running yet or not, which makes it harder for the right to
He's
attack
right
him on
not
his
to
record.
it.
Yeah, no,
He's
it's
right not to announce. If
his-
he announces he's not running, he becomes lame duck,
right.
and that's terrible.
Right. And if he
And-
announces he is running, he's got a target on his back in terms of attack on his policies or lack of
Yeah,
policies.
he's
So
not-
who's
not-
ever
not-
pulling the strings for him is doing a good job.
Right.
They're doing a good job. How was your
What
Passover?
else? Passover's always great.
And they're great spending it with the kids, the grandkids.
Great.
Right. So you
The only
know,
thing is I don't get any sleep. We end our Seder's at our celebration at 3 a.m. in the
wow.
morning.
We stopped at 2. I had it at 2 o'clock in the morning, so
Yeah.
that's it. But now that I know that you go to 3, next year I got to go at least till 3:01. You will not beat me.
No,
Murray.
now that you have all these new grandkids,
Yeah.
by the time they say the manishtanas and everything,
I know, it's
and
time
finally
to go
have
to
to
sleep.
come, and it'll be 4.
You know, all of the what we've
Before it was only you and your wife.
That's it.
And your daughters, maybe, you know. So.
everything we've unpacked today, and we really covered a lot of issues, but everything we unpacked has a common denominator, and that is, are there two Americas? And when you ask that question, it depends who you're asking it to, because if you're asking it to a liberal, oh, there are definitely two Americas. If you're asking it to a conservative, there's two Americas. If you're asking it to a rich person, maybe not. If you're asking to a person who's impoverished, there is. And it's interesting, you know, like I said, I teach, and my final this year to my students at Churro College is that. And it's a 6-part essay on are there two Americas? And I want them to take the competing and the opposite. They're going to write as if there is and if there isn't from two different vantage points.
There definitely is.
There's-
One is Brooklyn, and the rest, rest of the
Right.
United States.
No, but you know, when you look at it in a nutshell, you know, you ask the average, you know, urban African American living in Chicago, are there two Americas? Yes, there is. We're held down, and you know, the white man has every opportunity open to him. And you ask the same question to a white man in Chicago, are there two Americas? Yes, we can't walk safely on the street, and they can. We take a bullet from a cop, you know, by accident or on purpose, there's no protests. But an African American takes a bullet from a cop, whether it's on purpose or by accident, the place explodes. So there are two Americas. There's no question that there are two Americas, but it depends on who you're asking that question to, because the two Americas, you're going to get the exact flip side of the argument. I believe there's two Americas. I believe that there's...
I think we've really deteriorated as a country in our behavior vis-a-vis the rest of the world, vis-a-vis our belligerence. We're the only country since the Second World War that's been in so many wars.
Yeah.
The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraqi War, the last one where Biden pulled out the Afghanistan War. We haven't won any of the wars. We've had our people killed,
Spent
and
a
our
boatload of
treasure,
money.
right? And
lost standing.
now we're in a new war, not directly yet, but in danger of being directly involved, and that's the war in Ukraine. So, and we're the biggest suppliers of arms to everyone on both sides. So we're the most belligerent country in the world when one of our geniuses early on, Monroe,
Yeah. Oh, genius is a good one. Yeah.
President Monroe, said we should be careful and we should only get involved in things that affect us directly, North and South America. What are we doing in Vietnam? What's our interest? We're ready to go to war for Taiwan.
That was Vietnam was a quagmire. I mean, I grew
No,
up in
and
the Vietnam days.
how do we?
Yeah.
What's our issue with Taiwan? It's just we want that connection. It's for power, you know.
Well, I think there's some economic concerns there. I think if you let China get, and it's I mean, the cat's out of the bag already with China, but if you let China get too powerful, that can really have economic consequences.
We're letting them.
Why do we let them?
No, we're encouraging them because it's our behavior. Do you know that we want to cut off TikTok, right?
Right.
So that sounds reasonable. Except if China cuts off General Motors and Ford and our companies from selling in China, that's the biggest market. We're cutting our nose
to spite the face.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. We don't realize we put a tariff on China. That's one of the reasons we have inflation too, because we import much less from China. It's outrageous. It's like who's running this country is retarded, you know. And they didn't try. They made no effort to negotiate with Putin to avoid this Ukrainian war, because he said, if you agree not to let, and maybe he was full of bunk,
Right.
but at least you tell him, okay, if we'll agree not to, we didn't need Ukraine in the what is it called, the
NATO.
In NATO, we didn't need them. NATO is 20 strong countries. Right. We didn't need them in. It's not like we're desperate to have Ukraine and they're going to make a big difference. And he said, if you don't let Ukraine into NATO, I won't attack Ukraine.
Right.
Now, yeah, there's a risk that he's a liar. But you say, then if you do that,
risk and reward.
I'm gonna, you know, but they say, well, Neville Chamberlain gave in to Hitler, and then afterwards, after he gave him, Chamberlain gave him everything, he attacked anyway. That didn't change the history of the world, because he was going to do it anyway, and he did it. It was a good try. So, you know, Chamberlain was maligned. He died from disappointment, because he came back and he said, that's the end of all wars. You know, we made peace and so forth. But you give it a shot. That's what diplomacy is all about. There's no diplomacy, and now we're just sending more and more dangerous, more
weapons.
What is it called? Weapons of mass mutual destruction, mass destruction.
Yeah.
And it's outrageous. Like I said before, I think I told you this. It's outrageous that we send our young people, our most precious future, our young men and women, to kill other young people on the other side that were not for the leadership of these countries. They would probably be best friends and help each other and so forth. It's outrageous. And not only that, but China is developing some of the most advanced stuff, and we're saying they'd steal ours.
We're way behind China
if we
now.
both steal each other's, we're both all making progress.
Right.
That's ridiculous.
All right, Morty. For another day.
Did we cover everything?
I think we did. I think.
Did we do an hour?
Yeah. People might even think we know what we're talking about. That's how good this one was.
Okay. Well, it's your voice of wisdom that.
I've got you've got the voice of wisdom. I got the ears of wisdom, because I listen more than I talk.
I never had a voice. My father hired a cantor to teach me to sing.
Oh yeah.
And after 2 sessions, he said
asked
to
for
my
his money
father,
back.
"No," he told my father, "Save your money.
Yeah.
It's hopeless." So I get paid to not sing, to not use my voice.
Well.
But over the years, because I've lived so long, I've inadvertently gained a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom, supposedly.
We'll rub some of it off on me.
A lot of knowledge.
Amen. I hope to live as long as you and be as wise as you.
No, I've told my children and whoever I talk to that I care about, I said, look, when you're depressed and down and so forth, think of what you would do if your best friend, somebody you loved, even if to the point where they lost a child, and you can't do anything. That scar is going to be, and you can't tell them, forget it, and you certainly shouldn't. You got to go over there and say, my heart goes out to you. Don't say, this too will pass. You don't say anything like it. You say, I can understand. It hurts so much. It's a wound, but the wound over time gets less and less, and we'll do good things in the name of that child. That'll have that child live forever. We'll have a foundation if he died of cancer. Every year we'll have one or two parties and recognize his scribe and have his picture there. And you give him advice like that. And not only that, but you say, and I promise you, 8 years from now, we're going to be skiing again in Vermont and doing things that are fun. It's not the end of your life, because some people, when they lose a child, the mother goes into a mental institution, and the father, I think I told you this, I worked with a guy, Lindsay was his last name. His father was the wealthiest guy in New Hampshire. In the old days, he owned a mill. Everybody in the town worked for him. So much so that he said, just like in Ireland, he had the right to the bride on the wedding night before the groom. That's how powerful he was. But at that time, Lindbergh's child was kidnapped and killed, and it was a big tragedy. And his father got worried because he was so wealthy, and he had a sister in him. So his father hired guards around the clock, 24/7. And he says one day, one of the guards was cleaning his gun, and it discharged and killed the daughter, killed his sister. He says his mother wound up in a mental institution, his father wound up an alcoholic.
Yeah.
So sometimes the curse is that you are what worth. You're so wealthy. Anyway, I hate to end on this such a disappointing thing, but I just want to finish. So I tell them, what you do is just as you go to your best friend, when you have a problem, nobody else is going to solve it. You're the one who has to love yourself. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Nobody's with you 24/7 as you are with yourself. So you got to deal with yourself and love yourself and treat yourself as if you were your own best friend, and you should be your own best friend, and give yourself a pat on the back and give the same kind of advice.
Oh man,
and that's
agree,
that's one
1,000%.
That's one of the things. That's part of my. That's part of why I wrote the book.
Happiness
guaranteed, or your misery back.
I might read it one day.
You should.
Morty, thank you so much for having me
God
again.
bless you.
I appreciate it.
It's always great to have you.
Always a pleasure.
And you bring so much knowledge and wisdom. And to my listeners, thank you for listening. God bless you. I love you. Stay healthy. And every day of your life should be better than the day before.